and especially in America, there's the most. Oh, it's a lot made of nothing, as far as I'm concerned.
Something's been eating at Mick Jagger for years, and he just couldn't keep quiet anymore. Behind the Grammy wins and sold-out tours, there's a truth he's been hiding. The heart surgery wasn't his only medical crisis. His family tried to stop him from talking, but he did it anyway. What he revealed about Keith Richards will destroy their friendship forever. And the real reason Charlie Watts died has nothing to do with what they told us. At 81, Jagger is finally ready to burn it all down. The Rolling Stones may never recover from this. Mick Jagger was born on 26 July 1943 in Dartford, Kent. His father, Joe Jagger, was a PE teacher who always kept a whistle hanging on the door of the small bedroom at 15 Dartford Road. That's where Mick was born at 8:15 in the morning, while V-1 bombs flew overhead. The sirens were still sounding that day. His mother, Eva, once joked that instead of a lullaby, Mick entered the world to an air raid warning. She used to be a hairdresser and supported the local conservative association. Life was strict but loving. Joe measured Mick's every move like a drill sergeant. There are family notes showing baby Mick crawling across a rug in just over 6 seconds and doing a forward roll before he turned 1. Food was rationed. They got only 8 ounces of sugar each week, so Eva gave him mashed bananas instead. In 1949, Joe helped organize a basketball exhibition in Kent for American soldiers, something rare in Britain at the time. The family routine was orderly. Church on Sundays, perfectly pressed shorts, elocution lessons. Everything about their home life was neat, tidy, and traditional. That made Mick's wild stage life in later years even more surprising. In 1948, Mick met a boy named Keith Richards at Wentworth Primary School. They were only 4 years old. Their names were one above the other on the class list, sitting in Miss Gutzel's reception class. Keith had stolen some red marbles from his grandfather's shop. Mick offered him a piece of American bubble gum in exchange. That's how their friendship started. That Christmas, they performed together in the school nativity. Mick sang Little Donkey, while Keith played a toy drum. A local newspaper even mentioned their rhythm. But in 1954, Mick's family moved 3 miles away to Wilmington, and the boys lost touch. Then, one random day, 17th of October 1961, they both showed up at Dartford Station. Mick was holding 2 rare American blues records. Keith saw him and asked about the albums. They hadn't spoken in 7 years, but that meeting reignited everything. Both of them loved blues music. They stood there talking, missing 2 trains in a row. Keith later said the chances of that reunion were 1 in 100 million. Only 21% of students passed the 11+ exam in 1954. Mick did it easily, scoring 87% in math and 92 in verbal reasoning. He joined Dartford Grammar School and became head boy of Westgate House. He earned an A in Latin and led the cross-country team, but his heart was somewhere else. He was obsessed with American blues and R&B. He traded food with U.S. airmen to get imported records before they reached shops. One day in 1956, he brought a Muddy Waters record to school and explained the beat to his classmates. By 1959, he was editing the school magazine and sneaking in reviews of blues albums. He once disguised a Bo Diddley record review as an essay on spiritual music. The headmaster didn't find it amusing. He took away the school's record player more than once, but all that deep focus, all that analysis, would later help Mick negotiate record deals and contracts with laser precision. At 17, Mick formed his first band. It happened on 12th of March 1960 at 7:45 p.m. in Dick Taylor's living room. Mick brought a harmonica and a notebook filled with songs titled Repertoire Chicago Style. Their small group included Mick, Keith, Dick, and Bob Beckwith on a homemade bass. 8 friends came to watch them play. The rehearsal was recorded, and that tape still exists in the British Library. A few weeks later, they performed at the Ealing Coronation Club and were paid 3 guineas. Mick kept the money in a jar labeled Chess Fund. Even at that early stage, they were performing songs like I Just Want to Make Love to You, though none of them had serious girlfriends yet. A local paper called them noisy kids, trying to copy black music. Just 4 years later, critics would call them the most dangerous live band in Britain. Mick was accepted into the London School of Economics in 1960. 1960. He was meant to study accounting and finance. His fees were $50 per term, and he lived at Connaught Hall. On his very first day, he attended a lecture by James Mead, who would later win a Nobel Prize. But Mick was doodling guitars in his notebook. In just 12 weeks, he skipped 28 out of 45 classes. Instead, he spent his time at clubs like Ealing Jazz and the Marquee. He even carried a microphone in his briefcase next to his copy of The Economist. He practiced singing in public toilets because of the echo. He once wrote to his tutor asking to skip exams because his band had booked 6 shows. The university denied his request. He dropped out by summer 1962, but the time he spent learning economics didn't go to waste. Years later, he used that knowledge to cut profitable deals that stunned even the toughest promoters. That famous morning at Dartford Station happened on 17th October 1961. Mick was 18 and holding 2 American blues records when Keith spotted him. Keith had his guitar with him. They hadn't seen each other since primary school. They stood there talking about music, shops, and records. If Mick had slept a few minutes longer, he might have missed that train. And maybe the Rolling Stones would never have happened. At that time, Mick had 150 imported records. Keith could already play complicated guitar licks. They arranged to meet again that weekend. That meeting was the spark that changed both their lives and music history. On 7th April 1962, Mick and Keith went to the Ealing Club to watch Alexis Corner's band. But what really blew them away was a blonde guitarist using the name Elmo Lewis. His real name was Brian Jones. He wore a striped blazer and played slide guitar like no one else they'd heard. Keith said it was the first time he truly heard real Delta blues live. Mick wrote in his notebook, "Plays like James." Brian could even record catalog numbers from memory. After the show, they spoke to him at the train station. Brian said he was homeless and sleeping on floors. He had left Cheltenham and was busking to survive. Mick and Keith were impressed. That night, they knew they had found someone special. By May 1962, Mick was still trying to balance economics lectures with late-night gigs. His days started at dawn and often ended after midnight. He sang with Blues Incorporated and was paid 3 guineas per set. That was more than he could make working at Tesco. One night, during a BBC broadcast, his voice caught the attention of a producer who wrote, "Find this boy a contract." But at school, things weren't going well. His grades were dropping, and his professors noticed. The New Musical Express called him London's answer to Howlin' Wolf. Yet he still had to sneak into his parents' house quietly so they wouldn't smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. The Rolling Stones officially began on 12th of July, 1962. That's when they played their first gig at the Marquee Club. They were paid $20. The lineup included Mick, Keith, Brian, Dick Taylor, Ian Stewart, and a borrowed drummer. They had to carry their equipment down the fire escape because the stage door wouldn't open. Their set included songs like Kansas City and Got Love If You Want It. Mick introduced them as a band of little stones rolling across the country. There were only 48 people in the crowd, and the club actually lost money. But that night is now legendary. Since then, the Stones have earned more than $2 billion from tours alone. When the end-of-term results were posted on 27th of July, 1962, Mick had passed all 5 of his first-year courses. He ranked 7th out of 31 students. That was enough to land him a future job at Shell Oil, paying $100 a year. But on 3rd of August, he handed in a short letter saying he was leaving for music. His father, who made $720 a year, didn't speak to him for 3 weeks. His mother cried. The economy was bad and jobs were hard to get. But Mick had done the math. If the band played 4 gigs a week, he could make $13 after expenses. That was almost twice what an entry-level economist earned in a day. Still, nothing was guaranteed. When Brian missed a payment, their van got repossessed. They had to carry amps on the tube. In a 1995 interview, Mick said he could have written a thesis on the gold standard crisis. In June 1964, the Rolling Stones rushed into a small studio in London and recorded a song they barely knew. Keith Richards was still learning the guitar part as they hit record. Their manager had spotted a soul single by Irma Thomas in a Los Angeles shop and pushed them to try it. A few months later, on 25th of September, Time Is on My Side was released in the US. Within weeks, it climbed to number 6 on the Billboard charts. Radio stations that once treated the Stones like noisy outsiders suddenly changed their tune. One station in New York got 4,500 phone requests in a single day. That wave of interest landed them on American Bandstand. Mick Jagger's loose, drawling vocals and the band's gritty sound gave American teens something raw and new. It wasn't smooth like the Beatles. It was rough and emotional. The single also helped their US album, 12x5, go gold before they had even toured the country. Suddenly, blues covers weren't just underground. They were chart material. A few months later, something changed. In January 1965, the band was in Hollywood, recording late into the night. This time, it was their own song. The last time wasn't a cover. It was credited only to Jagger and Richards. Released in February, it hit #1 in the UK by March and stayed there for 3 weeks. It marked the moment British fans wanted the Stones' own voice, not borrowed sounds. The flip side, Play with Fire, was recorded at 3 a.m. in Los Angeles with Phil Spector playing bass. The two tracks showed the band had found their edge. Decca Records made 250,000 copies within 2 weeks, but shops still ran out by lunchtime, critics noticed. Even American DJs, who had once dismissed them, started paying attention. When they kicked off their March tour in Belfast, fans shouted the chorus for 2 minutes before the band could even begin. The press had a new headline, "Beatles Beware, the Stones Can Write." Just 2 months later, Keith Richards woke up at 3 a.m. in a Florida hotel room. Half asleep, he picked up his cassette recorder and played a fuzzy guitar line for 30 seconds. Then he fell back asleep. That rough idea became the hook for one of the biggest songs in rock history. 3 days later, Jagger wrote lyrics while driving down a highway. On 12 May 1965, they recorded Satisfaction in Hollywood. Keith insisted on using a new fuzz box to get the distorted guitar sound just right. The single was released in the US on 5 June. By 10th of July, it was #1. It stayed there for 4 weeks and sold 500,000 copies every week. In the UK, it was banned from daytime radio for being too suggestive. Still, when it came out on 20th August, it shot to #1. Time magazine called it a threat to parents everywhere. In Paris, over 180 teens were cited for rioting just hearing the riff at sound check. The Library of Congress later added it to its national registry, calling it a turning point. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural eruption. But it wasn't just the music. Mick Jagger terrified polite society. In March 1964, he stepped onto a London stage wearing tight checkered pants. The press didn't know what to make of him. A few months later, during an appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, CBS got 800 complaint letters in 2 days. Viewers were furious about his hip movements and the way he licked his lips. Sullivan said they'd never be invited back. Then ratings came in. It was the highest-rated segment of the season. Of course, they were invited again. During their second U.S. tour, venues started posting signs banning dancing in the aisles. At one show in Sacramento, police arrested 3 girls who stripped down while trying to reach Jagger. One officer wrote that Jagger's movements caused a lustful frenzy. British tabloids went wild. Some wanted the band banned from re-entering the U.S. None of it slowed them down. Their 1965 UK tour sold 84,000 tickets in just 42 minutes, a record that stood for decades. Just a year earlier, in April 1964, their debut album hit the shelves. It cost just over £1,000 to record. The cover had no name. The manager wanted people to learn their faces. Decca expected it to sell modestly. Instead, it knocked the Beatles off the #1 spot, ending their 21-week run. By mid-May, the album had sold 200,000 copies. Most of the tracks were covers. Only one was written by Jagger and Richards, but it didn't matter. Critics called the sound raw and exciting. Jagger's vocals were mixed so loud, the label begged the producer to tone it down. He refused. When the album was released in the US under a different name, it still hit #11, even with no radio play. One magazine called them the most dangerous thing in music since The Twist. It was clear they weren't just another band, they were something else entirely. Between 1968 and 1972, they entered their most creative stretch. It started with Beggar's Banquet, released in December 1968, and ended with Exile on Main Saint in May 1972. In just under 4.5 years, they made 4 albums that would define their legacy. Each one was shaped by producer Jimmy Miller and recorded in studios across 3 continents. Along the way, band members changed and Jagger became a father. Beggar's Banquet brought back their blues roots. Let It Bleed opened with Gimme Shelter and ended with a gospel choir. Sticky Fingers introduced their new logo and label, though Brown Sugar was recorded 2 years earlier to fulfill an old contract. Exile on Main Saint was recorded in a damp French basement and mixed in different cities, months apart. Despite messy production, it topped charts on both sides of the Atlantic. Years later, critics would place it among the greatest albums of all time. In those 4 years, the Stones blended blues, country, gospel, R&B, and hard rock, and they made it look easy. In 1970, Mick Jagger stepped into a film role that blurred reality. He played a burned-out rock star in a movie called Performance. Shot in 1968 but delayed until September 1970, the film was full of sex, drugs, and identity swapping. Censors demanded dozens of edits. Time magazine called it depraved. One song, Memo from Turner, was written with Richards but recorded without him. The film didn't make back its budget, but over time, it became a cult hit. In 2023, it was restored in 4K. Jagger's wild presence was credited with reshaping how people saw rock stars on screen. The same year Performance was shot, money became a problem. Each band member owed about £200,000 in taxes. Britain's tax laws were brutal, taking up to 98% of some income. Their manager had mishandled the books, so they were broke despite their fame. Jagger moved to Paris. Richards rented a villa in the south of France. It had no proper studio, so they dragged cables through windows and dodged local drug dealers. They recorded all night and mixed the songs later in Los Angeles because their work permits expired. The chaos produced Exile on Main Saint, and the escape from British taxes set a trend. David Bowie and Rod Stewart followed their lead. As Jagger once said, "You made £100, they took 90, so we left." One of the most powerful songs they ever made came from a storm. Keith Richards wrote the riff for Gimme Shelter while watching the wind flip umbrellas in London, but Jagger turned it into something darker. The lyrics echoed the violence on TV. Vietnam, assassinations, unrest. Released in December 1969, the timing was brutal. The My Lai massacre had just been revealed. Days later, a concert ended in disaster. In the middle of the song, Mary Clayton recorded her now famous backing vocals. Pregnant and in curlers, she belted out the line, "Rape, murder, it's just a shot away." Her voice cracked. Everyone in the studio stopped. It was haunting. Though it was never a single, the song became a soundtrack for war documentaries. Filmmaker Oliver Stone even opened his movie JFK with it. By 1989, they weren't just a band, they were a brand. When they reunited for the Steel Wheels tour, a promoter gave them $70 million up front. Sponsorships added millions more. The tour earned $90 million in its first year. Between 1989 and 2002, they brought in around $1.5 billion from concerts, merch, and licensing. They outsold U2, Springsteen, and even Michael Jackson. Even when they weren't recording new music, they made millions from old albums. Their tour from 2005 to 2007 made over $500 million. By then, their shows were run like major sports teams, with branding meetings and pricing strategies. They proved that a rock band could last, not just as artists, but as a global business. But not every show was a success. On 6th of December 1969, they planned a free concert in California. It was supposed to be the West Coast answer to Woodstock. Everything went wrong. The location changed at the last minute. They ended up at a bleak speedway with no fences, medical tents, or proper stage. They expected 80,000 people. Nearly 300,000 showed up. Traffic-blocked ambulances, Red Cross volunteers stitched wounds under kerosene lanterns. One singer got knocked out before noon. The Grateful Dead refused to play. What was meant to be a peaceful show turned into a nightmare. Security had been promised to a biker gang in exchange for $500 worth of beer. They parked their motorcycles in front of the stage and started swinging chains and pool cues. More than 60 assaults were reported in just a few hours. At 5:14 p.m., a young man in a bright green suit pulled a gun. A biker stabbed him to death while the Stones played Under My Thumb. Cameras captured everything. It wasn't the only tragedy. 3 others died that day. One was hit by a car, another drowned. A third died of an overdose. 4 people died, 850 were injured, and 3 babies were born on the Speedway ground. One coroner said it looked like a war zone. Mick Jagger was punched in the face when he arrived, but hours later, he walked on stage and tried to calm everyone down. Some band members wanted to stop the show. Bassist Bill Wyman later said he was ashamed they kept playing. Keith Richards said stopping could have made things worse. Decades later, the debate still lingers. One thing's for sure, that day changed the way people saw rock concerts forever. In January 1967, the News of the World accused Jagger of taking Benzedrine in public, confusing him with Brian Jones. Jagger sued for libel, demanding $50,000. The tabloid retaliated by alerting police that Jagger would be using drugs at Redlands. 10 days later, the raid happened. The case was weak, but the damage was done. Advertisers pulled back, the BBC banned their music, and the lawsuit was dropped. Years later, the paper collapsed during a phone hacking scandal. Jagger had once said it would choke on its own lies. He ended up up knighted in 2003. The newspaper didn't survive. Jagger and Marianne Faithfull had been inseparable since 1966. She was 19, he was 22. They lived together in a flat covered in black velvet. But behind the glamour, things fell apart. After the Redlands bust, her name was splashed across nearly 150 headlines. In 1968, she became pregnant. 3 months later, she lost the baby. She blamed the drugs and alcohol that had become part of her daily life. Depression set in. Jagger cheated. She struck back by sleeping with Keith Richards, a moment he later described as unforgettable. By 1970, she was homeless. He was writing Wild Horses. She believed the song started as her suicide note. They ended things the same week Brian Jones died. Jagger's private life became public obsession. One biography claimed he had slept with around 4,000 people between 1962 and 2001. That's one new partner every 3 days. The list includes Angelina Jolie, Farrah Fawcett, and even, allegedly, David Bowie. Keith Richards said Mick even seduced a therapist meant to cure him. Jagger joked he preferred anyone with a pulse and rhythm. By the 1970s, his accountants set up a fund called the Babylon Branch to handle paternity claims. He had at least 6 lawsuits in that decade alone. Jerry Hall once said he called every woman darling to avoid remembering their names. When asked if 4,000 was exaggerated, Jagger smiled and said he never counted twice in one night. He married Bianca in May 1971, just 4 months after meeting her. She was already pregnant. The wedding was chaos. The mayor was late for lunch. Traffic stretched to the airport, and Mick lost the ring. She wore only a white blazer. He wore green silk. Their daughter Jade was born that October, but Jagger didn't slow down. He was still seeing Jerry Hall and paying support for his first child. Born in 1970 to singer Marcia Hunt, he had denied paternity until a blood test in 1979 forced him to admit it. Bianca filed for divorce in 1978. She claimed adultery. The cost was $1 million. Still, she went to his album launch weeks later and danced with Jack Nicholson under a banner that read, "Miss You." Jerry Hall met Jagger in 1977 and gave him a choice: quit drugs or quit her. He quit drugs, but replaced them with sex. Their relationship lasted over 2 decades. They had 4 kids, but the cheating never stopped. Keith Richards once guessed Jagger's number was around 4,000. That made Hall ask for help. She went public and called him a sex addict. That shocked everyone. This wasn't rock star behavior anymore. It was something deeper, something medical. In the late 1980s, Hall pushed Jagger to try sex therapy. He went, but it didn't work. He seduced the therapist. Richards called it the most expensive quickie in rock history. Hall saw it as confirmation that he couldn't be cured. The band still jokes about it. On some forums, it's even listed under case studies about sex addiction. Jagger's tangled history with Anita Pallenberg nearly broke the band. In 1968, they were filming the movie Performance. Things got real off-screen, too. Pallenberg had been with Richards. Before that, Richards had slept with Faithfull while she was with Jagger. The band was caught in a cycle of revenge. Pallenberg later admitted she slept with Jagger once. Richards never got over it. He refused to let her appear in more films. He called Jagger Brenda. The feud nearly ruined recording sessions for 2 albums. Crew members believed sex was a weapon within the band. Jagger has 8 official children with 5 women, but that's just the official count. In 1969, Marcia Hunt got pregnant. Jagger sent her $200 and then disappeared. 9 years later, a court made him take a paternity test. There are still rumors of other children from the 1970s. In 1998, Brazilian model Luciana Gimenez became pregnant. Hall left him soon after. Hunt later auctioned her letters from Jagger for $182 to $250. She described how he would vanish the moment anyone mentioned a baby. Even now, at 80, rumors swirl about more children in South America and Europe. Richards had his own ways of lashing out. In the 1980s, he gave Jagger several nicknames: Brenda, Her Majesty, Tiny Todger. They hated each other during the mixing of Undercover in 1983. Engineers would mock Jagger when he wasn't in the room until they realized he was standing right behind the glass. Jagger got even by refusing to record guitar parts. Richards had to do it all himself. The studio bills piled up. That year alone, they used 400 studio hours and barely spoke to each other. Richards even wrote a song with a line that mocked Jagger's stage persona. When Richards was battling heroin in the late 1970s, Jagger took control. He rewrote tour plans, changed song keys, and micromanaged every detail. By the time Richards got clean, Jagger had locked in full power. Even when drug tests came back clean, Jagger kept control. Richards said he felt like an employee in his own band. The album Undercover only sold 1 million in the US, down from 4 million on the previous record. But nothing nothing changed. In the mid-1980s, the band nearly broke up. Jagger signed a solo deal. He told reporters he didn't care if the Stones folded. They didn't tour. They barely met. Internally, people called it World War III. Richards responded by spending $1.5 million on a solo album just to prove he didn't need Jagger. By 1986, executives had written them off. One article asked if the Stones were done for good. It was the first time anyone had taken that idea seriously. Jagger's solo albums didn't help his case. His debut reached number 13 in the US. His next album didn't even crack the top 40. One critic said even Sheila E. outsold him that year. His video for Let's Work cost $500,000 and barely made a dent on the charts. Richards' solo work, made with half the budget, sold better. By 2003, Jagger's solo albums were being listed among the most disappointing of all time. Then came the truce. In 1988, they met at a hotel in Barbados. Charlie Watts helped bring them together. They agreed to one more album, one more tour. That decision saved them. The album Steel Wheels came out in 1989 and sold 2 million copies in 10 weeks. The tour made $175 million. Their song Mixed Emotions reached number 5. They were back, and they were bigger than ever. Jagger used that moment to sign a $45 million deal. It was the start of a new era, but the years kept coming. In March 2019, Jagger needed heart surgery. The band postponed everything. His operation was delicate. Doctors used a catheter to replace a valve. The risk was real. Each canceled show was worth around $12 million. But within 10 days, Jagger was back to stretching and dancing. In May, he posted a video dancing to The Wombats. Doctors were amazed. By June, he was back on stage in Chicago, running over 12 kilometers during the show. His case is now studied in medical journals. Then came the hardest loss. In 2021, Charlie Watts died. COVID rules kept the band from saying goodbye. Jagger was crushed. At the next show, he struggled to speak. The band kept going, but it wasn't the same. Only Jagger and Richards remain from the original lineup. Still, Jagger turned grief into movement. Watts's last recordings appear on 2 songs in their next album. In 2024, Jagger kicked off another tour. At 80, he was sprinting across stadiums, performing for nearly 2 hours each night. He trained like an athlete. Gym workouts, yoga, 8-mile runs. His body fat was around 13%. He also raised his young son, collected vinyl, and played blues clubs in secret. When asked about retirement, he laughed and called it another word for boredom. In 2025, it all paid off. The Rolling Stones won a Grammy for Best Rock Album. Jagger was 81. It had been 29 years since their last win. The album featured Paul McCartney, Elton John, Lady Gaga, and even the late Charlie Watts. It hit number 1 in 23 countries. The tour earned $250 million. Their total concert revenue passed $2 billion. Backstage, Jagger smiled and said, "Not bad for a pensioner with a replacement heart valve."